The revelation of Scripture is a staple of many world religions. The gods, often through angelic intermediaries, choose to reveal laws, the secret of time, and the destiny of all things to various people throughout history. From Moses to Muhammad to Joseph Smith, these prophets reveal scriptures to the masses, which unveil the secret plan of creation, even the very will of God. Such a revelation was made by a series of angels to Dr. John Dee through his medium or scryer Edward Kelley in the late 16th century. This revealed scripture as perhaps one of the most obscure and mysterious in world history, a book of grids filled with otherworldly letters and numbers which are supposed to detail the nature of God and the angels, but also the origin and final destiny of all creation. Indeed, it's the very speech of God by which creation came into being, hence its name, the Liber Loagaeth, or the Book of the Speech of God. This mysterious volume is at the core of the apocalyptic angelic revelations made to Dee and Kelley in their, let's call them, tumultuous angelic conversations, and is said to have the power to unlock the most powerful form of magic ever known to human beings. In our second episode on Enochian, or as Dee often had it, celestial, Adamical, or best, just the angelical language, I'm going to explore perhaps one of the most mysterious scriptures ever revealed to mankind, the Liber Loagaeth. If you haven't seen the first episode on the angelical language, you may want to check it out first by clicking the card above. Also, if you're interested in magic, hermetic philosophy, or the academic study of the occult, make sure to subscribe to the channel, check out my other numerous contents on topics in esotericism, and also, if you want to support this work of making accessible, scholarly, and free content on topics in esotericism accessible right here for free on YouTube, I'd hope you consider supporting me via Patreon or perhaps with a one-time donation. You can find those links below, and I just want you to know that I really do appreciate your consideration of supporting the channel, your subscribing, your liking, and your sharing of the content. I'd also like to say a special thanks to Father Aaron Leitch for looking over the script for this episode and sharing his really wonderful and deep insights which make this episode possible. If you're interested in Enochian magic or the angelic language more generally, his studies are really indispensable, and you can find links to his works in the description below. But now, let's turn to a scripture that records the divine speech of God and is said to unlock the very gates to the apocalypse itself. Dr. John Dee's Book of Enoch, or the Liber Loagaeth. I'm Dr. Justin Sledge, and welcome to Esoterica, where we explore the arcane in history, philosophy, and religion. As I pointed out in the first episode on the angelical language revealed to Dr. John Dee and Edward Kelley, the notion of a divine Ursprache was a major interest in Renaissance semiotics, or the study of representation, and ontology, or the study of being itself. Further, this was also a world in which the desire to return to a primeval source of wisdom was all the rage. The battle cry of the Renaissance could have well been ad fontes, or back to the sources, with a rising interest in ancient language such as Hebrew and Egyptian hieroglyphics, but also a deep interest in the primordial wisdom of ancient sages, such as the Egyptian Hermes Trismegistus. Indeed, Dee himself had already waded into these waters in his 1564 Monos Hieroglyphica, which sought to produce a single glyph which would serve as a universal signifier, Kabbalistically welding metaphysics and semiotics. And it was precisely into this philosophical, mystical, religious landscape that the angelic conversations take place, and which further make the revelation of the Liber Loagaeth so utterly shocking and profound. The revelation of the Liber Loagaeth by the angel Raphael begins in the spring of 1583, about a year into the angelic sessions, which up to that point have mostly been concerned with the detailed unveiling of complex ritual devices and furniture for further concretizing contact with the angelic and otherwise celestial world of intelligences known as the heptarchic magical system. This system was essentially medieval and Solomonic in nature, although greatly augmented by angelic revelations. With that guidance basically complete, Raphael teases that he's going to reveal a special medicinal liquor, as he puts it, or treasure, to Dee and Kelley. Of course, at this point, those wild and crazy guys are more interested in the location of buried treasure, which they basically pester the angels about endlessly. I mean, pester. Like, the angels have to kind of chide them at points because of their obsession with buried treasure. Though, as Leitch rightly pointed out to me while I was preparing this episode, the angels are actually kind of stringing the boys along with promises of treasure. Here, they let them believe that it's buried treasure when it's actually just, the keys to all creation and the apocalypse, no biggie or anything, before finally making the dupe more or less obvious to the guys, although I don't think they ever quite got it. Angels known for their practical jokes. Though on that buried treasure front, I also share this weakness, guys, because Goonies never say die, and if you have to pester angels, well, you gotta do what you gotta do. I mean, folks, it's buried treasure. Buried treasure aside, Raphael does slowly reveal that this mysterious medicine, and it's, well, nothing short of the most important revelation ever bestowed on human beings. So, what is it? Kelley witnesses a volume bound in blue silk with the title in the angelic or divine language, Amzes Naghezes Harde, which apparently means either, quote, the universal name of him that created, universally be praised and extolled forever, or let those that fear God and are worthy read, or more simply, Loga, or speech from God, or somehow all of these. Within are 49 golden leaves or folios containing grids filled with angelic letters and numbers written upon with still wet blood, all bound together in the style of a book written in Hebrew or Aramaic. That is to say, written right to left and bound backwards compared to books in English or Latin. What commences on Good Friday of 1583 is the painstaking revelation of this volume to Dee via Kelley. What do I mean by painstaking? Well, the first leaf is actually a 49 by 49 grid of entire words, about 2,400 words in total in the celestial speech, revealed one letter at a time in the order of how the words are read in angelic, but which must later be reversed to be written out correctly. This would be a bit like the Torah being revealed to a person who doesn't know Hebrew by spelling the words out using the names of the individual Hebrew letters. Beit, Resh, Aleph, Shin, Yud, Tav. Bereshit, which has to be then rewritten right to left as Bereshit, in the beginning. That's just one word of 2,400 or so, and that's just the first folio of the Liber Loagaeth. This process is so arduous that Dee basically complains to the angel Raphael, who becomes so incensed that they storm out of the sessions, not to return, though his office remains and the rest of the revelation occurs orally rather than with Raphael visually pointing to the letters in an exemplar text. Further, the first folio of entire angelic words is actually reserved in such a way that its meaning, with some exceptions, isn't at all revealed to Dee and Kelley, or any human being for that matter. I'll say more about what little we know about its meaning in just a moment. After the first folio is revealed, the longest strings of text in the angelic language known, what follows are a revelation of 48 further folios, with each containing grids filled with letters and numbers on both their obverse and reverse, with the exception of the last grid, which is a string of 105 characters set into 5 tables of 21 letters each. Confused yet? Great. Just go with that feeling, because things aren't going to get any easier or clearer from here. Before turning to what little we know about the actual grids of the Liber Loagaeth, just what is this book supposed to be? The angels, and there are several angels at work in this revelation, including some OGs like Raphael, Gabriel, and Uriel, but also Elemensa, who goes by El, which might be an angelic nickname. There's Ava, who seems to be primarily responsible for the Enoch connection in all this, and hence the misnomer that the language or revelations or the magic associated with this system are Enochian. There's Nauvaj, now more famous for being primarily responsible for the angelic calls, for which we do have English translations, and will be the topic for the 3rd episode in this series, and Galva, who actually turns out to be wisdom herself and eventually provides the title for the text, Loagaeth. From these angels, we get some clues about the nature of the text. Turns out, the Liber Loagaeth is kind of many things at once. It's said to contain knowledge about the nature of God, the nature of the angels, but is also the speech by which all creation came into existence and how the apocalypse itself will occur. In fact, it will be used as a kind of final revelation to humankind, unifying and perfecting all religions and the herald for the end of the world, like Antichrist, Apocalypse of John, end of the world. Thus, Dee and Kelley are meant to be nothing short of, well, the final prophets, with the Liber Loagaeth being the final scripture, which contains the divine speech itself by which the cosmos was created, and by which it will be, I guess, annihilated. Now, I'm not saying this is a bigger deal than buried treasure. Yes, it always goes back to buried treasure, but the apocalypse is kind of a big deal. Further, the text was first revealed to the antediluvian patriarch Enoch, and in fact, misknowledge of it said by the angels is said to have caused the sinful generation, which was destroyed by the flood. It's exactly this association with Enoch, who was physically taken to join God without dying famously, that caused the text to be known as the Book or the Tables of Enoch, and how the whole sessions and the angelic language have now come down to us to be known as Enochian, for better or worse, mostly for worse. Though there's no evidence that Dee actually had access to the apocalyptic Enoch literature, which only completely survives in the classical Ethiopian languages as and only became known to Europeans in the late 18th century. Even the revelation of the Liber Loagaeth to Kelley was physically demanding. He describes peering into the scrying stone such that a sword of flame would pierce into his head, causing him to sweat profusely and enter into a altered state of consciousness or trance, in which he felt something moving about inside his head, which is just super creepy. After 15 minutes or so passed, the sensation would, quote, come to a rest, and Kelley could fluently read and speak the angelical language, a power that he lost when not in that trance state. Similar traditions of tongues of fire entering the heads of prophets is recorded as far back as the New Testament book of Acts, and is even depicted as part of the mystical visions of Hildegard of Bingen, who also developed a mystical language of her own, the famous lingua ignota, which I've actually made an episode about if you want to check it out. Further, much of the first folio of the Liber Loagaeth betrays the telltale signs of glossolalia, or speaking in tongues, especially in some clustered repetitions. We'll talk more about this in a moment. Also, it appears that the revelation of this scripture would proceed in phases of roughly 40-day cycles. 3 40-day cycles, 40 days of revelation, 40 days of rest, contemplation, and clarification, and then 40 days to recopy the Liber Loagaeth in the angelic script from right to left. Now, the actual process of how all this went down is a bit of a huge mess, and by the end of it all, Dee is begging the angelic maiden Madimi, who he actually named his daughter after, to get her mom, who is actually the wisdom angel Galva, to just make him a copy of the book the way that it's supposed to be, which she actually agrees to do and then doesn't really deliver on. Of course, this is all recorded in the spirit diaries if you want to trace out this wonderfully complicated drama. And trust me, there is no better drama than angelic drama. Now that we know the importance and mode of revelation, what do we actually know about these grids? Frankly, not much, but let's say what little we can. Virtually all the tables are given titles in the angelical language, though just what these titles mean in relation to the tables is unclear, unsurprisingly. They may act as seed words in a way similar to the 36 by 36 tables of the Book of Soiga that Dee was convinced, and the angel Uriel affirmed, was known to Adam in the Garden of Eden. Though, as I've pointed out in other episodes on Dee, the Soiga tables were generated using a mathematical algorithm not discovered again until the 1990s. Not that that doesn't mean that, I guess, Adam didn't have that algorithm too. Hashtag Adamical algorithm. Well, the first folio is composed of entire words, as I've mentioned, 49 by 49 words, roughly 2,400 in total, and seems to be reserved for the, quote, God Christ alone. Despite this, a bit about the text is known from the angels, and it seems like the first tables recall the very creation of the universe itself, along with the creation of the angels, and eventually the details of the fall of Lucifer. Specifically, lines 21 through 23 are said to be, quote, invitations very pleasant to good angels, and may perhaps be some kind of angelical invocation, though again, no translation of this section is provided. The second table is said to represent, quote, the kings and ministers of government, though whether that's celestial kings and representatives or terrestrial government isn't clear. This might also be a good time to mention that the Liber Loagaeth can also be used for remote viewing, or really just spying on various parts of the globe, which shouldn't be terribly surprising given Dee's role in the world of Elizabethan espionage. The fourth table has something to do with the incarnation of human beings into our physical bodies, while the ninth is perhaps the strangest and most famous of the tables of the Liber Loagaeth, as it was reproduced in Casaubon's True and Faithful Relation. This table is unusual. I mean, unusual compared to the other tables. All of this is pretty unusual, to say the least, because it contains numerals in its four corners and a circle in the center with further numbers, along with the name of the heptarchic prince of the sun and Sunday, Bornogo, written in a star-like pattern, kind of like a shining sun. While the spirit occurs in this table and none of the others, again, it isn't clear, but this table does stand out as somewhat idiosyncratic. Further, table 19 or 18, depending on how you count, if you count table 1 or not, is said to be, quote, about the spirits of the earth. This is also the table that Kelley read aloud, which seems to have accidentally summoned some spirits with shovels who promptly began to beat Kelley until Dee used a magic wand basically to banish them. So don't read any of this out loud unless you want to be beaten with angelic shovels. The remaining tables seem to represent the 30 aethers, or the heavenly realms or strata reaching up from the earth to the well, the very throne of God. This is also, by the way, how you do the whole remote viewing thing, by contacting the appropriate angelic governor of the appropriate aether. These aethers aren't exactly stacked atop one another, but seem to interpenetrate each other somehow. Also, it's worth mentioning that this text is structured like a Hebrew book, and thus one descends, like Merkava tradition, one descends from the aether of Lil down to the fourfold a first aether of Tex. This seems either lost or ignored by some occultists, with folks like Aleister Crowley kind of going backwards or upwards in his famous working. I'm not sure exactly how that worked or whatever, but yeah, that's a thing. The last and 49th table is also, it's unusual. It's revealed by the angelic wisdom spirit Galva. The final tablet seems to represent the evil and chaotic final period of the reign of the Antichrist as a kind of epilogue to all of creation. Unlike the others, this table is actually written in 5 tables of 21 letters each, though the Revelation actually contains a total of 113 letters, which, with a little manipulation and kind of looking at them sideways, can be reduced to 105 letters, which do actually fit into those tables. Further, the final revelation of Table 49 is accompanied by horrible appearances and is said to represent the, quote, disorder of the world, with Dee noting that it was, in fact, quote, a hellish, wicked one. Indeed, Galva calls the tables a hodgepodge without order, though, interestingly enough, the word loga is actually the very first word revealed in this final evil table. The language of the Liber Loagaeth isn't particularly otherworldly despite its alleged angelic origins. For instance, it doesn't really contain any particularly exotic phonemes. They're more or less identical to those of Latin or English, and despite a few consonant clusters that would prove difficult for an English speaker, though perhaps a Polish speaker wouldn't have any problems at all, there isn't anything specifically challenging about the pronunciation of the angelical language here. Though you should probably recall that whole Edward Kelley getting beaten by spirits with shovels bit for reading parts of it aloud, and you don't have John Dee with you to use his rainbow magic wand combo breaker against them. As I noted earlier, there are also telltale signs of glossolalia, or speaking in tongues, especially localized phonemic clusters in either repetition or just slight mutation, or both. I do think this is evidence that Kelley did enter into a significant alteration of consciousness during these sessions. While no extended string is translated in the Liber Loagaeth, some glosses of words are given, and it appears that there is some phonemic continuity with the later angelic calls. Though, at least from a computational level, for instance, calculations of Shannon's entropy or Zipf's laws on the Liber Loagaeth and the angelic calls does seem to reveal enough informational difference to indicate that these languages, the language of the Liber Loagaeth and the language of the later calls, are in fact distinct. Now, what to make of that, I don't know. While I've done some amateur computational linguistic analysis of these two data sets, I'd really love to work with an academic computational linguist on a full analysis of the angelic language. To my knowledge, this has never been done, and it would be a really fascinating little project. Shoot me a message via my website if you're an academic computational linguist and this sounds interesting to you. So, how are these tables supposed to be used? It appears that after copying them out correctly, they are somehow unlocked or open using a series of 48 calls or psalm-like texts written in the angelic language, along with all that complex ritual furniture described in the earlier heptarchic system, starting with the second table. Recall that the first one is sealed for the, quote, God Christ, and the first angelic call, along with the famous prayer of Enoch revealed by the angel Ave. One would work through each of these tables and calls, including the final call of the aethers, by substituting the names of the various aethers, starting with Lil and working your way down, so to speak, to the layers of Tex. Though just how this is supposed to work is anything other than clear, and there's basically no evidence that Dee and Kelley even attempted such an undertaking. I mean, this whole thing is supposed to kinda herald the apocalypse, so monkeying around with it seems like a real bad idea, like, I accidentally the apocalypse. Sorry level of bad ideas, but you do you, as the kids say. Though I should point out here, there's a long-standing disagreement in the world of Enochian magical practice about the correlation of the apocalypse with the dissemination of the Liber Loagaeth and the opening of the Liber Loagaeth by the Gabofal ritual actually causing the apocalypse. Of course, correlation isn't causation, and while the journals do strongly correlate them, the revelation of the Liber Loagaeth with the coming apocalypse, it isn't totally clear that the relationship is causal, that unlocking the Liber Loagaeth causes the apocalypse. Though if the Gabofal ritual doesn't inaugurate the apocalypse, then what does it do exactly? Well, good question, because as I pointed out, Dee and Kelley never really seem to have unlocked it or practiced it. My speculative answer is that it seems to be some kind of mechanism for descending, yes, descending toward the divine, perhaps resulting in communion or communication with the Godhead, perhaps in a visionary form, not totally unlike the ecstatic forms of revelation found in other works of Renaissance occultism. Think Ludovico Lazzarelli and Cornelius Agrippa. Though I'm really just speculating, it's all rather mysterious and, oh yeah, it's all real scary. I'm serious, apocalyptic levels of scary. Of course, I'll be coming back in the third episode of this series to take a look at the angelical calls themselves. These calls are important both magically and linguistically because they contain extensive sections of translated material and thus insights into the vocabulary, grammar, and syntax of the angelic language itself, a topic that's been profoundly interesting to both occultists and linguists for ages. In fact, it was the so-called Enochian language that got me interested in the academic study of esotericism to begin with. So that episode's going to be a ton of fun to make. I get to channel my inner 14-year-old self. The text of the Liber Loagaeth can be consulted in the original manuscripts in Edward Kelley's hand and Sloan 3189, though it's worth noting that many of the final tables there are incomplete. Though, this incomplete status of the later tables may also prove to be a really important insight into just how they were constructed, a project, however, for another day. Printed sources include the recent and positively encyclopedic Magical Child edition of Dee's Spirit Diaries, along with a really inexpensive and worthwhile CD that can be purchased from Joseph Peterson's amazingly wonderful website, The Twilight Grotto. In my opinion, the most comprehensive study of the Liber Loagaeth and the Gabofal ritual to unlock it is Father Aaron Leitch's work, especially his first volume of his study of the Angelical language. In fact, this episode would have been really difficult, maybe even impossible, without his wonderful insights and scholarship. I'd really recommend you order his books from his website, where you can get them signed, but also you can more directly support the author himself. Trust me, folks, these publishers and these writers of these occult texts are doing this as a labor of love, and they're not getting rich doing it. Make sure to support small publishers and independent authors. As I mentioned earlier, I'm going to return in a future episode to discuss the angelical calls along with the vocabulary, syntax, and grammar of the angelical language itself. Again, make sure to subscribe, check out my other content, and consider supporting my work of making content like this accessible for free on YouTube by taking a look at my Patreon or perhaps considering a one-time donation. Again, you can find those links below. Until next time, I'm Dr. Justin Sledge, and thanks for watching Esoterica, where we explore the arcane in history, philosophy, and religion.